Hi everybody, Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. With me today I've got Andrew Jenkins, and Andrew and I are going to talk partly about his new book, Social Media Marketing for Business, but we're also going to talk about social media marketing and scaling social media marketing. Is one of the things, subject areas that we want to get into. If you're a regular, you know that I always ask the first question of the guest, which is, where can people find you, Andrew?
They can find me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Andrew J. Jenkins, and Twitter is @AJenkins.
Fantastic. And congratulations on your new book.
Why, thank you.
I think it came out
in March.
March, right? Yes. Congratulations. And what? I mean, I always ask this question. You know, I happen to know some of your journey, and if anyone has a copy of the book, they know that I'm actually mentioned, I think, in the first couple of pages. Yes. And I really appreciate you saying that, Andrew, in the book, because I know that we actually had a number of conversations, but it would be useful for you to share with everybody else why you wrote the book and what the inspiration was.
So I've been teaching a course on social media strategies for enterprises for the last 8 years at the University of Toronto. And there was a text that we were using from Chris Barger called The Social Media Strategist. Great book, but it's a decade old. And what I liked about it, and why we continue to use it, have continued over that time to use it as a text, was that it was not only about social media marketing, but it was also prescriptive, a bit of a resource and a guidebook on when you find yourself in a social media role in somewhat of a mid to larger enterprise or organization, some of the things that you had to deal with that weren't about marketing, social media policies, operation, budget for tools and resources, etc. And I thought there was, when I was looking at, potentially replacing the text, there's lots of social media marketing books out there, but this idea of marketing, as well as all these other things that are maybe not as sexy as the marketing part, but necessary, needed to be revisited. So that was the inspiration. And, I infused it with examples from a number of my students who work in enterprises, as well as my own experience with the clients that we work with.
And I should say that it's scaling an integrated social media strategy across an organization is the full title.
That's right.
So that was the reason why you wrote the book. Give us a feel for walk us through a little bit about the story in the book and what it is that you cover. I know that you've talked about the scaling bit, but we'll get to that in a moment.
We start. We can begin with something as simple as the individual, because there's a chapter on employee advocacy and social selling and personal brand, because as something that you've highlighted before as well in your own writing and your own content, is that as much as we talk about corporate brand and so on, you have employees that are your advocates, your ambassadors, your representatives in social. In many ways, if you can tap into that, that's a far greater cumulative reach than your organization itself. So, the book does touch on, starting at the individual and then ratcheting it up to how does that spread across an organization. One of the most overlooked aspects about social media within an organization is change.
Yep.
Another one is culture. And, to some social media strategists and marketers, that's not the sexy part. But unfortunately, you're going to face internal politics. There will be a war for who owns social, and there'll also be a war for who doesn't want to touch it. So, and all those sort of internal.
We have a client where the social media manager said to us on the first meeting, the content that we're sent by marketing is crap. And we said, have you told them that? And they said, well, it's kind of. So you haven't told them that? No. Okay. And I'm just saying that because it's a great example of a piece of politics that you're going to, here's somebody fairly fresh out of college, walked into a fairly significant social media role, that second one in their career, and they realize that actually what they're having to deal with is rubbish.
I worked with a company that was the result of one organization acquiring another. Yet the founders of the acquired had got to their payout, their handcuffs were off, they were gone. But their fingerprint on the organization was still there.
Right.
There was the cultures were diametrically opposed to one another, and the acquirer was all about social. The acquired were like, don't want to touch it, don't want anything to do with it, and you won't get any support from us. It was like, but thankfully the CEO was wanting it to happen, and so worked with cascading that through the culture, and it even made itself evident. I facilitated a conversation and a bit of a workshop with marketers from all these different departments, as well as the communications team, and it seemed to be that we got to a level of consensus. And then I said, so after our engagement here with your company is done, who owns this?
Yeah.
And there was this long, awkward pause because nobody wanted to stick their neck out, and I couldn't be the one as an external firm saying, well, you should own this. They had to come to that conclusion themselves, or decision themselves. So
yeah.
And again, I keep saying it's not the sexy part of social, but there's been so many strategies that have died on that hill, trying to change culture and win consensus. So
yeah, and I think it's such an important point, Andrew, that it requires people to learn new things, and it requires people to unlearn certain things. Just as much as business has required us to change as we've gone through our own careers.
Yeah.
For some people, social media is a mechanism that they use to communicate with their friends, and they don't necessarily understand the business acumen behind it, or the need for business acumen, and the fact that there's an expectation from our investors, our buyers, our future employees that we're good at it.
Well, there's this idea of now increasingly with digital, you're now trying to be an employer brand. You want to use social to aid your recruitment, so you do have to look current and with it. And if you don't, and you're not transparent through your social and things like that, it will be an impediment to your hiring. It's saying building a social enterprise is it's easy to say, it's not easy to do. I often say that you're going to have your employees layered over a bell curve. You're going to have the digital natives and the people that are keen on digital at the far right of the bell curve, and they really don't have to be convinced. They're already, it's part of their behavior, it's natural or intuitive to them. You're going to have a fat part in the middle, which is like the bulk of the employees that are indifferent, but they'll follow the momentum of the organization. And then you're gonna have people on the far left, and as I like to say, they don't want to tweet, and you can't make them. And you'll never convince them. So there's no point.
It's can't cook.
Yeah. So focus on the fat middle that that you can just teeter them to the right eventually.
Yeah, and I think there's a we see that all the time. The classic bell curve. There will be a set of people that it's really just a case of giving them the permission and the empowerment, and they will basically fly. We actually don't see that we don't see age coming into this, because we actually find people who are used to networking, going to an event and giving a business card, actually are very good at social.
Yeah.
So one of our best student was 69 years old, because he'd spent his life going to events. But classic bell curve of I was on a podcast yesterday, and someone said, so what happens if your C-suite won't get involved in social? And I said, well, you got a problem, because there has to be ownership and there has to be leadership. Well, and there's an expectation now from across the whole board, whether it's job seekers, buyers, future employees, that you're involved in social.
Well, I saw a post of yours from yesterday where you mentioned that a CEO needs to be in social.
Yeah.
And I thought it was rather serendipitous or timely, because I don't know if you saw the LinkedIn post of a CEO being vulnerable and showing a picture of himself crying, and how it's exploded, and not necessarily for the right reasons. Now, I agree with you that having a social CEO, and there's stats to prove the value of that, but there is an appropriate way or a good way to be a social CEO. And then there's, I won't say that the CEO was necessarily wrong. Maybe the intentions were good, that his heart was in the right place, etc. But perhaps, maybe needed a second set of eyes to run it by, and say, what do you think? Is this gonna have blowback? And sure enough, it did. And now he's a meme. The phrase that this is the most vulnerable I have ever been here is now a meme, and I'm sure that's not what was intended. There's we now have to think about what's the memification likelihood of what I'm about to say or do.
Andrew, I mean, part of that is, what most CEOs do is that what they do is that they go to a marketing agency, and a marketing agency tells them what to do, rather than actually being trained. And actually, he was probably told to put that out, or even someone probably put it out for on his behalf or her behalf. Rather than actually being trained, just as we're trained on diversity and inclusion and health and safety and all of those things, and then part of it is actually making a judgment for ourselves.
Right. Well, and I think part of it though too is the message we often talk about, which is, when it comes to social for your organization and for yourself, is to pay it forward. Don't make it about you. Don't be promotional. And I think perhaps if he had considered what he was about to say through that lens, I get it. He was being vulnerable about how he felt, but some of the criticism, and I'm not trying to take sides here, is that he didn't make it about the people that he had let go that had caused the tears in the first place. And so I'm sure you're seeing it too. There's a lot of people that are posting on LinkedIn saying, if you've been one of the recent layoffs, especially in tech, let me know if I can be of help. And it's the leading with paying it forward, the leading with being helpful, the leading with delivering value versus, I'm the victim here, woe is me. Because now they're bringing back posts from 2 weeks ago that look when juxtaposed with the post from yesterday. And unfortunately, as they say, the internet lasts forever. So, and so people have receipts.
Yeah. So Andrew, let's crack on to look at, if we need to scale social media internally, what do we need to do?
Well, I tend to suggest start with an audit. What channels are you on? What channels are working? What channels should you be exploring? I've often believed that every organization has a story to tell and has existing content. So it's just about the analogy I use is that people have to put on their content hat. What kind of content do we have now, and in what form? And then what can we repurpose? The example I like to give is, a bank economist comes out with a report. It's in PDF. You can put in your email and get it. But can you interview the economist? The reason I bring this up is because we do a lot of work in financial services. And so it's taking a core asset, and then how many different ways can I make that accessible? Interview the economist, turn that into a 2-minute video for YouTube, or a minute or less for other platforms. If it's, give us 5 highlights in that video about the report, that's a 5 highlight listicle. It's a 5 highlight infographic.
And everybody loves 5 points type.
Yeah, like McKinsey likes 3, but but it's that idea of, okay, it was one foundational asset, and now suddenly I have 20 or more pieces of content potentially from that core asset. So organizations are busy. They've got their hands in a multitude of things, and every person within the organization is doing many things. and oftentimes social is done off the corner of someone's desk. So if you can work smarter rather than harder. Then also look at the audit of content, what channels you're on, what channels you should consider, rationalize what channels you may want to leave, or if they need to be rejuvenated with a bit of paid. And one of the biggest things is just applying consistency. There's so many social channels, and we're challenged at Volterra as well to be consistent. That's the cobbler son shoes scenario.
Yep.
But that's one of the biggest areas to have immediate impact. We've seen with client engagements where they've been ad hoc or sporadic is lock down on consistency, get a nice rollout of content. And then the other thing to look at is, okay, what are your long-term goals as a corporation? Where does social complement and support? And ideally, if social can have a seat at the table during planning, not necessarily to take over the discussion, but to identify where and how it can help the strategic objectives. It's often brought in as an afterthought. Too many times I've seen, if we'd known that, we could have done X.
Yeah.
And then the last thing is, do you have the sufficient resources, both be it people and tools? And some people want a Swiss Army knife of it when it comes to technology, and there are enterprise-grade social media suites out there like Hootsuite Enterprise, Sprinkler, etc. You have to look into those. How many seats that you want? What options do you want? Do you want the third row seat? Do you want air conditioning? Whatever, and whether that's going to be sufficient, or sometimes you might find it's actually overkill. We've tended to acquire a tech stack that is more task specific. So we'll have a robust listening solution, robust analytics. But again, we only do social. It's something we live every day. And so it's not necessarily the same for an internal social media team.
And what about things like policy creation with HR?
Well, first, you want to see, does one exist, and how long ago was it updated? If it doesn't exist, is there any reference to social in a corporate code of conduct? Or is there sufficient language in the code of conduct that might address issues that arise when it comes to social? And the mere word policy doesn't go over well, because the way I describe it sounds rather draconian. Thou shalt not do this, and thou shalt not do that. Now, some organizations have done things like social media guidelines, which is more of a positive spin on it. It's more about encouraging best practices, encouraging model behavior, and saying, if you're going to do this, we recommend the following. Dell had a thing called Smack You, which was their social media training, and they had different tiers of training. If you were an employee but didn't use social in your job, you were given training to be familiar about the implications of social. Then there was the next level of training for those that used it for their job. And then the next and final level was for those that were media representatives of the organization, so that they had a sense of how social and media relations were intertwined. And that was used in relation to the social media policy. And so increasingly, it's not just about your behavior in social. People are being captured in public and then being flagged as, this is an employee of so-and-so. Is this the kind of behavior of someone that should be representing your company? And basically their employer is being shamed into firing them. This is unprecedented. And there really isn't a social media policy to address that. That's more of a code of conduct thing that's now spilling over into social, and that's where things are going viral. There's a great phrase, I forget who told me it, but don't say anything in social that you wouldn't want read out in court.
Or you wouldn't want tattooed on your body.
Or I like to say, don't say anything on social you wouldn't want to say to your grandmother in front of a room of 100 people. Now, unless your grandmother swears like a sailor, then you may not.
So what about things like stakeholders?
How do you mean?
if you're a social media manager, you're going to need to deal with different stakeholders.
Right.
So we've already looked at, there's human resources, there's probably marketing, there may be sales, depending on where social fits. So that's 3 stakeholders that you've got. You may have your own line manager yourself, and then it may be you're going to start. People are going to say, procurement is going to say, well, we need to be on social.
Yeah. Well, in terms about managing them or supporting them.
How do you think you should manage them and support them?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think having some, just sounds so simplistic, but have a coffee with them if you can, or a virtual coffee, to find out more about their work and where and how social is relevant or important to them. And you and I are both coming from a sales background. It's in typical sales, like it's not about what's keeping them up at night, which is an overused phrase. It's more about what are they trying to achieve. And you want to make sure that whatever your mandate is with social is to try to find the connection between what they're trying to achieve and where and how social can support them as a way of getting them on board. Now, there will be some people that you may come to the realization, you know what, we will never have their support, and as long as they're not going out of their way to impede us, then okay. But if they become like a blatant impediment, then that's a bigger issue. But we were in a client engagement, and I was talking to my sponsor, and I was wondering whether or not there was an internal resource that lost out on the role that I held as a consultant.
Good point.
Could only suspect that there might have been a roadblock because that they were overlooked. But all you can do is, we tend to go in and say, we're not here to disrupt, we're not here to replace, we're here to support, and ideally, if we can make internal resources more successful, and come at it in a non-threatening way. And even I would suggest this to anyone that's in a staff role is, look for that opportunity to support and help others succeed. It's basic fundamental change management. Look for the bright spots that you can amplify to others. You've done social selling training, so have I. Try to find the people that are already exhibiting the target behavior and showcase them to the others. Because we go in as external parties, it's very hard for us to say, you should do this convincingly because we're an outsider. But if we can say, look what Mary's doing, or look how Mary's team is succeeding by adopting whatever the recommendation was, or whatever the result of the collaboration was, that's going to lead appropriate change.
Andrew, thank you so much. The 20 minutes goes so quickly.
My pleasure.
Just to remind everybody, Andrew's book, Social Media Marketing for Business, Scaling and Integrating Social Media Strategy Across Your Organization. Well worth getting a copy of it if you're in social media and you're looking to scale it, or if you're just in social media and you need a top up in terms of your knowledge. I've read it, but I'm quoted in it, so I have to declare an interest that I'm quoted in it. Another great Kogan Page book, of course, Andrew. Andrew, remind people where they can get hold of you.
You can find me on LinkedIn. Just search Andrew Jenkins. You'll see a banner of the book on my profile, so it'll be easy to find. And A Jenkins on Twitter.
Brilliant, Andrew. Thank you so much for today. It's been so insightful. It's such a massive area. Having worked in corporate myself and social media, there are just so many landmines that or tripwires out there that you could quite easily trip or step in. So I mean, it's a great background in terms of being able to understand what's out there for you.
Well, thanks again for the opportunity to chat.
You're welcome, Andrew, and good to talk.